Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Email Marketing Benchmarks. How do you measure up and how can you improve? Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Gagin. I work at Digiday's in-house content agency, Custom, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is presented in partnership with IBM Marketing Cloud, which enables the delivery of exceptional experiences for its customers across the entire buyer journey by leveraging customer data, providing analytical insights, and automating cross-channel interactions. We're joined by Jay Jun, Account Director of Enterprise Services at IBM Marketing Cloud. As an account director, Jay serves as a client partner in evaluating programs and casting a vision for a customer-centric, behavior-driven lifecycle marketing. He's passionate about helping marketers make the most out of their digital marketing programs and has comprehensive experience spanning all aspects of the spectrum, with email marketing as his foundational discipline. In the last 8 years, Jay has had the privilege of working with some of the world's biggest brands, both B2B and B2C, in industry verticals that include financial services, insurance, hospitality, retail, e-commerce, energy, healthcare, nonprofit, you name it, Jay has done it. He thrives on building relationships with cutting-edge technology partners that enhance the emerging world of the IBM Marketing Cloud. Jay will dive into the data from IBM Marketing Cloud's exclusive 2016 Email Marketing Metrics Benchmark Study, which was a performance analysis of emails sent by nearly 3,000 brands. He'll cover how measurements differ by industry, vertical, region. He'll dive into some new mobile, holiday, and engagement metrics that you should really be paying attention to. And above all, he'll teach you how to map out strategies and tactics that will take your own programs up a notch. And as always, much more. A question and answer period will follow our presentation, so please stay through to the end. Feel free to submit questions at any time via the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. Tomorrow, everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive an email with a recording of the session, which you can watch on demand when it's convenient for you, and catch up on anything you might have missed. That email will also include a link to the full 2016 Email Marketing Metrics Benchmark Study so that you can take a deeper dive into the metrics, benchmarks, and verticals that are most relevant to you. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Jay, take it away.
Great, Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone that's online. Appreciate you taking the time to listen in today. I will jump right into quite a bit of content. So hopefully, if you're got kind of one ear open, maybe one eye kind of paying attention to what we've got pushing through, this will all be worth your time. But as Joe said, I work for the IBM Marketing Cloud, work on a team that basically does consulting for marketing consulting and marketing strategy for our clients. So I've been in the industry for going on better part of 10 years, and if you are one to tweet, my handle is Email Rocks. It's a little bit of a mission statement, but certainly follow along if you want some free tips after this webinar, or if you ever need to hit me up for a quick question, happy to interact with you there. So, today's agenda, give you a little bit of a roadmap here. I'll give you a little bit of background on the report. I'm going to jump into a selected set of metrics and some tips that go along with each of those metrics. And then I'll give you 7 different things that you can do at the end of our time together that'll help you apply what we've walked through. So hopefully you'll be able to talk about this and put some of this to work right away. If you are tweeting along, if you would use the hashtag new way to engage and mention me, that would be fantastic. If you have questions, you can tweet them along, and you can also put them through the webinar tool as well. So that being said, let's get going. So the question when we think about benchmarks is, and maybe this is a little bit of an existential question for you for your program, is, where does your program live? Are you just average, or are you a top performer? I don't know if you lose sleep at night wondering about that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think ultimately what you end up wondering is, where are your opportunities to improve? Nobody really likes the status quo. Most bosses will ask you to push the envelope and get to the next level. And benchmarks will definitely help you guide that journey in terms of setting goals for what might come. So really, benchmark data can really help answer some of the questions of where your program measures up, but really they're going to be most valuable when you use them to really, like I said, just guide where you're going with all this. So let me tell you a little bit about the data and how we got these results. We had the data set that we used for the survey and the report is based on clients of the IBM Marketing Cloud who opted in to participate, which was great of them to do. So if we have any clients out there, thank you for sharing your data. We had a team dive into the data, ran some scripts, sliced and diced all the data, and that definitely played a part. So I definitely appreciate the team that did that work. As Joe mentioned, there were over 3,000 brands representing 750 different companies across 40 different countries. So this is definitely a global, this gives you a global flavor to how email programs were performing and how these metrics played out. It was based on the full 2015 year data set, and we were able to categorize the clients that did participate across 18 different industries. And below that, you can kind of see how the different regions were represented globally. If you had seen our report in previous years, you know that we hit the basics around the fundamentals around open rate, click rates, list churn, but there are a couple of new things this year, if you haven't already seen this, that we'll dig into. One is that we sliced and diced based on holiday retail and e-commerce. So I'll touch on a couple of things there. And then another really cool piece that we added this year was our email usage and engagement metrics, and that is through our email insights feature that our clients have used. That is driven off of the Litmus integration, if you're familiar with them. So we get some pretty cool insights into where people are reading their emails and how long they're engaging. So that'll be I'll get to that towards the back end of this. So again, when you think about whether where you want to be, you probably don't want to be. No one's gonna. I would hope that no one would want to be less than average. Otherwise, you might be a slacker. But this is probably something that your boss will ask you. Where do you measure up? And so when we look at the numbers, the way that we have all of our statistics reported is that we have the top quartile, the bottom quartile, the mean, and the median. And really, the ones that are particularly interesting, the one that you might really hear of or talk about most often is going to be the median, which is, hey, what's the average of this, average of that? The top quartile is definitely a little bit more aspirational. So certainly there are different drivers that might explain why certain industries are in that top quartile, but it does give you something to aspire to. So just know that as we walk through and touch on some of these stats, that's how we're going to break things out. So getting into the metrics. We'll start with open rates. And where we'll start with open rates is the unique open rate. This is probably the most common metric that email marketers are asked to talk about. But this first slide here, you see how the open rate varies across different regions of the world. You've got your mean, again, your average open rate across all of the regions came in at around 22%. The top quartile, you can see, is a pretty drastic difference there, almost 42%. And, those higher rates could be indicative of a mix of, a few different things. One, I would say, is that might be indicative of brands that are more aggressive about segmentation, and they may also be using a good bit of automation as well, where they're using behavioral data and being a little bit pickier about who they send to, which will always help drive higher engagement rates. Certainly, there are some audience distinctives involved with each of these. Even within any given industry, you've got a wide variety of different personas, different types of customers that are represented. But the other thing is that you're going to probably see that. Mixing up my notes here. So yeah, I'm jumping ahead here. So yeah, I guess the thought here is that in the spirit of the Olympics, the United States didn't exactly win gold in this category, but I'll move on from there. So kind of to what I was going to get to in terms of these open rates. When we break it into the industries, you see that the top performer from an industry perspective was schools and education. They came in with a mean of 31%, top quartile, blistering at almost 60% there in terms of the open rates. And then on the bottom end, you have, based on how we categorized our participating clients, agencies and media publishing came in a little bit on the low end on the mean open rate there. So as you scan these, certainly, try not to jump to conclusions. Don't have a panic attack if you're, far below it. If you're celebrating, if you're above it, hey, congrats. That's great. But I think that what is true about these metrics, whenever I'm asked to talk about these, there's so many factors that play into this. And if you're, already sort of maybe a little bit skeptical about what you're seeing, it's probably warranted. You will never know exactly based on these numbers, the types of campaigns they were sending, how often they were sending. You can take guesses, but there are so many factors that drive these numbers that, these are directional numbers. So take them for what they're worth. The interesting split that we did here on these open rates, though, when you look at transactional versus non-transactional, you see quite a big difference, right? You see for transactional, the average, the mean quarter, every number just is significantly higher. And what drives that is really when you think of transactional email, whether it's a receipt, in particular, if you're thinking about a purchase receipt, there is a high level of anticipation. And so, there's certainly a ton of opportunity. The thing that I would say for brands is if you are not already working with, typically, your IT team may be mostly responsible for driving transactional emails. If you are not already in conversation with them, these numbers tell a very compelling story that you should collaborate with them and try to see if you can mix in other marketing messaging into your transactional messages, and that can take the shape of a cross-sell, upsell, and even doing things to build the brand that can be part of the transactional messaging. So when you think about your open rates and where they land on the spectrum, I want to leave you with some tips on things that you can do. So the first thing that I'll cover here, the first thing I'd say is with your subject lines. Best practice that you'll hear often is, hey, you need to test your subject lines, A/B testing. I personally have a slightly different view on that, where I think that it was important to test, and it's certainly one of the great things about the email channel is that you can test and learn and apply those learnings. I don't necessarily think that you have to apply them every single time you hit send. I think that what you want to do is really try to think of it from the perspective of a learning agenda. Think about the things that you want to learn about your audience and the kind of subject lines that they might respond to better, and then set up tests and then proceed accordingly. Run your tests, find your learnings, and then apply them and move on. So, but that's certainly an area where if you are wanting to move the needle on your open rates, testing is definitely one path. Another recommendation we'd make is, understanding the impact of frequency. If you are sending at a fairly high frequency, if you are sending to your entire database every single time, there's a high chance that you are going to see lower open rates. And that might rub you the wrong way. It really depends on what your situation is and what your performance indicators really are. So just understand that as you increase frequency, and if you are doing sort of a blanket approach, you might see lower open rates. So definitely worth just taking a closer look at how often you're sending. The third tip I would give you is that you have this opportunity to build brand value through content, and and when we talk about white space, what we're talking about here is if you look at your emails and you see that every single email that you send, whether you meant to or not, whether if they all say buy now, buy now, buy now, there's certainly room to add a little bit of some diversity to your messaging in terms of the kinds of content you're delivering. So they really could be more around, this is an audience that has given you permission to market to them. They're interested in your brand. You might tell them more about your brand. You might tell them some things that they may not have known, just to help them become your advocates. And it breaks up the monotony of just buy now, and will keep them interested in your brand over time. The fourth tip I'd give you is getting into active and inactive segmentation. And if you don't already do this, I highly recommend it. It might be eye-opening. Brands that I've worked with in the past sometimes do this analysis and realize that, you know what, half of our database has not opened an email in a year. That is hard news to take, but it's real, and it's something that you need to address, because what you're going to see is likely anywhere from 4 to 6 times, 6x difference in your open rates between your inactive and your active segments. The results obviously will vary based on your audience, but if you're not already doing that type of analysis, it's fairly eye-opening, and it does change the way that you think about how you send emails to your inactive audience, and that you might have to be more aggressive with offers. You might have to consider maybe holding them out and leaving them out of certain communications because it may not matter. So take that into consideration. And then if you're not already doing this, optimize your pre-header text. This is the first bit of HTML text that's in your email. Most of you are probably familiar with this, but I'll give you a little bit of an example to illustrate that. But this is really an opportunity to take advantage of, and this is particularly relevant to the mobile reading experience. So if you are an iPhone user, this is something that you're probably very familiar with. And this first example from Bike Nash Bar, you see here, they do a pretty nice job of this. They include the offer, they have a product price point. So there's a lot that you can take away just from looking at that subject just in the inbox, looking at the subject line, and the pre-header text. You have a pretty good idea of what the email is about. So that increases your chance of getting someone to open if they're interested. This Golfsmith example does an okay job where the pre-header text includes some urgency, messaging in terms of 4 days only, but then it does waste some of that opportunity on that second line where you start seeing that, well, if you are unable to see this message below, click here. That view in browser message really honestly has zero business in that pre-header text. If you have it in there, if it's taking any part of it, you're missing an opportunity. So don't be shy about the pre-header text. And then there's the womp womp, kind of the fail here, where this is, someone maybe just is missing this. Maybe it's a default feature where that shows up first. Be intentional in your design of your emails to make sure that your view in browser text is not taking over that space. With that, I'm going to pivot into click-through rates. And while there are multiple slices of the click data that are in the report, there are a few that we're going to focus on. One is the first is the unique click-through rates by region, then the click-to-open rate by region, and then that click-to-open rate for transactional emails. You might catch there's going to be a little bit of a theme to where we're going with that transactional story. But bear with me, I think you'll understand why. So we'll start with the regional breakdown on the click-through rates. You have, you can see how it differs with the overall mean at around 3.3%, the median, and if you're not familiar with median, that's sort of the halfway point where half the results are above or below. There's 1.6% overall, but that top quartile, you can kind of see the drastic difference there at 9.5%. And then the bottom quartile really struggling there. And the thing about the click-through rate that you want to be reminded of here is that this is really a proxy for how your content is performing. When someone goes past the inbox, decides to open it, are they going to click? What do you have in the content of that email, the body of that email, that's worth the reader's time to click through, right? So one of the things, as you dive a little bit deeper into that click, you take a subset and you take the those that opened and of that group, how many people clicked. This is often referred to as an effective rate. You might have a different name for it, but a lot of marketers actually really find this metric to be particularly helpful in understanding, well, of those, do we do our job? Do we move them through the funnel experience of, getting the email delivered, getting the email opened, did they click? And so what you see here is, on average, 1 out of 10 people opened the message actually clicked. And again, you can kind of see that the top performer in that top quartile, if you can imagine 1 in every 3 people that open an email, if you're in that top quartile, that's certainly where you kind of see the maximum potential. And those people, in all likelihood, those types of customers that click 1 in 3. Those are probably indicative of your VIPs and your brand advocates. This last lens, when we look at it, when you look at the transactional versus non-transactional, again, you see just how powerful a transactional message can be from a marketing perspective. It's not just the receipt. Huge opportunity here because certainly there's a ton of utility that's baked into the transactional message. So take a retail example where, hey, your package has been shipped. You're going to get the open. If you want to track your package, that's a very common thing that we all probably see. From a B2B perspective, if it's registration for a webinar, that might be the kind of thing where you deliver the link to the email, link in the email to download a white paper. You can kind of see where that transactional email is not just that. It's a huge opportunity to cross-sell and really leverage. So, again, as we talk about email design and email content, one of the things that hopefully most of you are already at a place of doing is really optimizing the email experience for mobile reading. And what I'll do is walk you through a couple of different things here in terms of hopefully you're in one of these 2 camps, but you can kind of see where your click-through rate. When we talk about converting, if you have a template that is only designed for desktop and you're talking about moving to a responsive template, the why behind that is that you're really trying to see an improvement in your click-through rates because you really see, probably a significant part of your audience reading your emails on a mobile device. So in this example by Garmin, you can see that on the left, the desktop version is kind of a hero plus 2 columns. And then with the responsive design, you can see how some elements hide, shrink, and then and restack into a single column. So certainly that's one way to look at one good reason to switch your templates to a responsive template if you're not already there. The other approach that a lot of brands use, and this example from Moose Jaw, is a mobile-friendly approach. Now, the thing about responsive is, and this may be something you're hitting your head against and your team is hitting against, is there's somewhat of a learning curve, and it's thankfully over the past few years it's become less and less esoteric. There are a lot more ways to find free templates that are out there that you can use as a foundation and then to just modify and adopt. But there is a little bit of a learning curve. So a lot of brands that have constraints where maybe they don't have the time to develop a responsive template every time, they might use a mobile-friendly type of a design, where you can see on the far left, you can see how the entire email stacks up, but you can kind of see as you dive into it a little bit more, separate from every little piece of this is very thumb-friendly, right? You've got these broad horizontal sections, you've got very easy to read bits of content. You see, especially the buttons for pretties or for dudes, these are both very easy to understand what you want. What you're going to see when you tap on one of those elements, and you're not going to fat finger it. So definitely another thing to consider if you are still in a world of heavy text, text hyperlinks. Those are sometimes kind of finicky, hard to really interact with on a mobile device. So definitely reason to consider a mobile-friendly approach. Another thing from a design perspective to take into consideration for improving click-through rates is that how you position your content and where you place your calls to action can really make a big impact. So you can imagine, Fabric.com could have put that call to action to shop now anywhere in this email, but they did a couple things that are interesting that you might take away from this. Is that one, I think our eyes naturally gravitate towards offer type of language. So in this case, that 15% off, not only was it high up in the email, so regardless of where you're opening the email, you're going to see that offer and the discount. But placing that call to action near that definitely improves, gives you a chance of improving the click-through rate. And the other thing too that they did here, which is really interesting, is that if you have subscribers that are used to visiting your brand's website, and they're used to seeing, just from a subconscious level, they're used to seeing a color that's associated with an action. Here you see that the Shop Now mimics that color, and the design is in line with what they have on their website. So both things that you can do to improve your click-through rates. At the end of the day, when you look at, when you think about buttons and calls to action, you really need to just keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Don't make it so vague where it doesn't have any meaning, but your calls to action need to connect to something or convey something of value to the subscriber so that they decide that they're going to click through. Moving on, we'll go into list churn metrics that are in the report, and I'm just going to touch on, while we have metrics around hard bounces and complaint rates, we're going to just focus today on the unsubscribe rates that we were seeing across regions and industries, and I'll tell you a little bit about what you can do to improve those as well. So you can kind of see here with the average overall, you see a rate of roughly 13 out of 10,000. The percentage probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but when you think about the numbers, you've got only 13 out of 10,000 contacts unsubscribing. The bottom quartile, which would really be a concern, from your air quote worst case scenario, you've got 44 out of 10,000. So while those numbers don't seem like a lot, if you're a high frequency sender, that's going to really deplete your database fairly quickly, sooner than you realize. So obviously you're always trying to keep that low, but you can kind of see how that breaks out. There's not a ton of variance, but you can kind of see how that varies across different regions. When you break it down by industry, you have some pretty stark contrasts. So when you look at nonprofit associations and government in terms of the clients that participated, very, very, very low rates, 0.052%. And then, for consumer products, 0.2% on the high end, right, as sort of the average rate. And, that's if you think about your content and giving people a reason why they're not going to stay on your email list, on your database, receiving marketing emails, this really becomes a story about relevance and value. So you really need to be careful if you see high spikes on any given campaign or a trend of more and more, then you might really need to pull back and take a look at your content and see if you're in the right place in that regard. So a few tips on improving your unsubscribe rates. One, certainly there's an opportunity to leverage behavior and automation, and that can take the shape of re-engagement or win-back type of campaigns. If you have data that tells you when the last time someone opened or clicked an email in your database, certainly, and this dovetails back into my comment about active and inactive segmentation, but take that behavior, what you're seeing there, and pivot that into a program that really helps reinforce, hey, it may take the shape of something like a, hey, we miss you, or do you still want to, are we done, are we breaking it up? Certainly, you've probably seen some creative examples of that, but that leveraging automation of behaviors really is one way to stem that unsubscribe rate. Another thing to consider is managing expectations. And this goes all the way back to what, the little box on your website. Hopefully it's a big box if you're a more modern thinking marketer today. But go back to when that opt-in experience and the kind of things that you promise when people opt in. you need to go back and look at that and say, well, are we paying off on the things that we told them? Because whether you believe it or not, consumers are looking at that. They remember that. They remember what you promised. If you promise some sort of value, they're expecting that. So if you're not delivering on that and you see unsubscribe rates, in a place that you're not comfortable with, you might just check that again. Offering alternatives to opting out. Now, while CAN-SPAM requires that you have an unsubscribe link and making it available for a recipient to say no, there's certainly an option to give them where if you have a preference center and you give them an opportunity to opt down instead of opting out, and that certainly helps keep them engaged, keep them from completely stopping any kind of marketing emails coming through, but it gives them control and it gives them a chance to say something about maybe the types of content that they're more interested in or the content that they're not interested in. So it's not an all or nothing type of proposition. And certainly, one of the cool things about the Marketing Cloud platform with IBM is that you have an option to snooze where you can just ask people, subscribers can just say, hey, I just want to take a break for a month or 2 months and then come back to it. So just consider giving alternatives to just opting out from everything. And the last recommendation, which is related to everything else, is really think about value-added content. Think about things that are exclusive, things that you can share via an email that they wouldn't necessarily know, that they may not necessarily have access to. That right away will help stem your unsubscribe rates. All right. So getting into one of the new sections, the device, client, and engagement rate section of the report for this year. Again, it's a new component, and there are a couple of reasons why this may be interesting for you as a marketer. So the first may be that if you have a mobile app that is out in the wild, this is an area where you could take this data and target communications that are related to your mobile app. It certainly can help you if you are in a place where you're trying to justify converting your email templates to mobile friendly or responsive. This is the kind of evidence that you'd want to take into your budgeting meeting and say, hey, you know what, we're really missing an opportunity here. Here's the evidence. Let's go do this. And make those changes to your template so that they're responsive or at least mobile friendly. And so we're going to touch on the device client by region, by industry, and then we're going to get into the engagement rate by region as well. So if you've been around email a good while, you probably remember as the rise of the smartphone came about that you started seeing 15, 25, 35, 45, just year over year, just leaps and bounds in terms of mobile readership. And certainly there are other benchmarks that you can find out there. Our numbers seem to validate what everybody is seeing. And so among the clients, through this massive data set, we saw about a 49% average mobile readership. And you can certainly see how that is fairly consistent across different regions with slightly higher, you see the UK and Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world at a higher rate. But you can kind of see how, the pie is split in half and then in quarters for the most part, for a good part of the world where it's certainly across North America and the United Kingdom. But, if this is the first time you're seeing this stat, it may be eye-opening and really may tell a compelling story of how you need to make that move and really consider what the user experience is from a mobile device. And one quick thing that I'll say is just to define how how to interpret the numbers. Webmail, if you're not familiar, what we're referring to here is if you are in a browser like Firefox or Chrome or Safari and you are logging into Gmail or Outlook.com or Yahoo or AOL, that is what we would refer to as, was measured as a webmail open. Mobile does include smartphones and tablets, and then desktop is something that would be more like Outlook or Apple Mail, or if you're lucky to be an IBMer, Lotus Notes. So that's how you want to interpret those numbers. So when you look at the breakout by industry, you can kind of see that for food service, sports, and entertainment, they came in the highest, and this is across regions, right? By industry, they came at a higher mobile readership than the other industry. That came at the highest. And then on the low end, you had computer hardware and telecommunications. So you can kind of see how these numbers vary. It's very easy to envision how how and where people check their emails based on how the industry is, and certainly you can imagine that that's going to be applicable from a B2B versus B2C perspective. So very interesting to see how that varies. So the next piece that I want to dive into is this engagement rate, and the way that you want to interpret, the way you should understand the numbers that come out of this report when you see it, is that for those that are listed as having read the email, that means they spent 8 seconds or more. The tool tracks up to, I believe, 20 seconds, and then anything after that is gravy. So it doesn't make much of a difference there. So at more than 8 seconds, then you've got skimmed, which is 2 seconds, between 2 and 8 seconds, basically, and then you have those that glanced, and that's less than 2 seconds. When you look at how the regions break out, you might draw there are some interesting conclusions that you might draw here. Certainly, the United States coming in at a strong 26% at glance and spending less than 2 seconds. Either we're, as a country, we're extremely attention deficit. We have some ADD going on here. But I think that what you really might see there is that there are so many brands that are marketing, and we all get so many emails. There's a lot of competition in the inbox, so people are not going to spend a lot of time reading the emails. So when you think about your content, you might think twice about a long-form newsletter that has 4 different articles in it, and it'd be maybe unwise to think to expect that, well, yeah, someone's going to read every part of that, not in less than 2 seconds, right? Certainly, there are those that will read longer, and we'll see how the industries break out here in a second. But if you're marketing to Australia, New Zealand, you've got long form emails are probably just fine. So you can see how those numbers can be instructive on how you can make improvements. When you break it out by industry, the insurance industry came in with the highest read rate and the lowest glanced deleted rate. So there's something about the content there that, in terms of the types of content that the insurance industry is sending out, there's certainly a lot of time being spent. And that may be just because of the nature of, we just don't like scary things, we don't like risky things, so insurance does pretty well. In terms of schools and education, a very low read rate in terms of, and then a very high glance deleted, which, if you remember, they did pretty well from an open rate perspective, but people are not spending a lot of time reading their emails. So if you're in that type of if you're in that vertical, then take that under advisement. One of the things that one of my colleagues recently wrote about, my buddy Lauren McDonald, talked about was, are we using too many words? Have we gone to a place in modern, I guess, society where words just aren't cutting it? We have a bit of a fascination with images. When you think about the rise of Instagram, Snapchat, and all this visual media, the rise of YouTube, certainly from a video consumption standpoint, people just are really gravitated towards imagery. And so this Microsoft study back in 2015 by Microsoft really spoke to, part of the reason why I think that the read rate is benchmarked at 8 seconds, right? And if people spend less than 8 seconds, how do you make an impact? And so when you think about visual impact in email, and if you're trying to make the case for, if you're having to fight the fight about, hey, we've got too much content in this. If you're trying to take a print piece and jam it into an email, just kind of I want to give you a couple of things to think about. So, a little exercise here. I'm a bit of a foodie, so I love food and I love reading things on Yelp. But when I look at, this is one of my favorite barbecue joints here in Atlanta, and when you read this description, it's like, yeah, I might get hungry if I spend the time reading every part of this. But what the truth of the matter is, if I just saw this picture, I would get that takeaway right away. I'd be like, I want that. I need that now. In fact, I might be drilling a little bit, even though I already had lunch looking at this picture. So, it's one of those things where when you think about the investment you make in your visual assets, in terms of the imagery, in terms of the photography, I think that oftentimes marketers that I've worked with have really been in a tough spot where you don't have access to high-quality photography, or you don't have, if you're running the email program, you don't have a say in when you get photo shoots. It's already after the fact. You can't really ask. Already the ship has sailed, and you get what you get. So when you think about visual impact, and you're trying to tell the story of try to make a change there, really think about, tell the story of how long people might be reading your emails, and tell the story of how you need to make that visual impact much faster. I think with restaurant vertical in particular, you see heavy use of imagery. And you know why? Because they need to make you hungry in like 2 seconds flat. And after that, if you give me a long story, I'm really probably not going to consider it. So moving off of the food topic, I'll give you a couple other examples and things that you might see that from a visual impact standpoint, there are plenty of opportunities. One, you can kind of see in this Carter's example that the text is really easy to see. You can read the offers very clearly, and whether you're on desktop, whether you're on mobile, you can see that right away. As soon as you open the email, you got them that far, you can already see right away what's on sale and what the offer is. In the case of Fabric.com, again, another one of our great clients, they use that visual impact in a different type of way, and they use that more from an emotional tug. Certainly, they're in the business of selling fabric, but you can see how the photography they've chosen tells a bit more of a story. It's a little bit more aspirational. It really connects some of why what you can do with that fabric, and so it's a little bit more of an emotional tug, but it definitely catches your attention more than just if you can imagine trying to send an email that just has a fabric swatch. Not going to be very sexy. So definitely open those conversations with whoever is responsible for creative and see what you can do to get better assets. Ultimately, when you think about email and you think about the creative and making that visual impact and really getting people to spend more time, this quote by Ryan Barley from Staples, eliminating friction is more important than engagement. And you certainly we all want engagement, but if you don't make it easy, if you don't make it simple, if you don't make it something that's digestible very quickly, then you're missing out. Another opportunity, really, another couple of emails that I really love seeing are these emails that YouTube sends out. And if you're not already using animation in some of your artwork, certainly consider it. I know that in the early days, you'd only see it during the holidays, and you might see retailers really use this the most because they're really making that investment. But consider what you're seeing here. So at the top of an email, separate from the subject lines, which they do a very nice job of kind of leaving a little bit of mystery and intriguing you to open it. Once you open one of these emails, right away you have something that's visually engaging. It's going to keep you there more than a couple seconds at least, right? Because you see some motion and you see something happening, and then it definitely leads you into other content. So a couple points here. One, if you're not already looking into animated GIFs or cinemagraphs, where you're taking video and putting that into a kind of a heavier animated GIF, definitely consider that. But the other thing that I would say is, and this is pertinent to click-through rates as well, video and email is amazing. It has always proven to be a strong performer. Video is a medium that today, by default, is very mobile-friendly, especially if you're hosting content on YouTube. YouTube's done a nice job where if someone clicks through, it's going to go to the native app experience, and it's a great user experience. So definitely take those into consideration. So this last section that I'm going to talk through is, again, one of the new sections of the report, and it was a little bit of a breakdown of holiday versus non-holiday among retail and e-commerce brands. And what I would say before, those of you that are B2B, that are not retail, before you hang up and give up on this, there's something here for you too, right? Because part of really what you see, if you strip away the wrapper, right, the wrapping paper on holiday, really this is a story about the behaviors. And what marketers do during the holidays is that they send at a much higher frequency, and at the risk, and what's at stake is, well, are we going to drive more revenue, or are we going to turn off our subscribers? So what you see in this report is pretty interesting in terms of how that ramped up frequency during a season affects open rates, click-through rates, and unsubscribes. And certainly the other metrics are in the report, but I'm going to touch on just those three. So with the mean open rate, it definitely was much higher during non-holidays. This is not unexpected, but if you are one to start ramping up your frequency in any season, certainly you need to expect that your open rates are going to go down a little bit. And if for some reason you have if you're sending reports and it caused alarm, you need to do what you can to tell a story of, hey, no, this is expected. This is what's going to happen. And I'll definitely touch on a little bit more of why that is. But you can see how it's about a little bit better than a 3-point difference non-holiday versus holiday in terms of the open rate on average. When you look at the click-through rates, similar type of story. Higher click-through rates for non-holiday than holiday at about a point difference. And that certainly if you have a pretty good-sized database, that could mean a lot of website views that you may feel like you're missing out on. But make sure that you know that there is going to be a difference there. When we look at the unsubscribe rate, and this is certainly an area that has some sensitivity, and maybe something that keeps email marketers up at night a little bit, is the fear that if you keep sending, every day during the holidays, or if you're sending, twice a day, 3 times a day, depending, Black Friday is a bit of a blitzkrieg, right? And so what you see overall, though, for that time period, the non-holiday unsubscribe rate is actually a little bit higher, right, than the holiday season, which might seem counterintuitive. But here's the thing about these numbers, whether it's the open rates, the click-through rates, or even the unsubscribe rates that you want to remember, right, is that one of the things that, when you think about email marketing metrics and you think about opens, clicks, and unsubscribes, the big three, if you fixate on the rate alone, you're not going to be in a good place. You really need to be careful of that, because if you are wise enough to set your business goals around certain things where if you go to bed at night knowing that, I'm trying to maximize my impressions and the number of people that click through to my website, when you see the difference here in the number of emails that are sent, when you send 7 times, in this case, in this report that Lauren had actually run as well, the rate goes down, but your cumulative totals in terms of your opens and your clicks goes up. So you're going to find that your business leadership are probably going to be like, that's fine, I'll let go of the open rate or click-through rate. But if you have sort of an unreasonable type of stance, would be really, hey, you need to maintain your open rates and get more of that. Certainly, nobody's against that, but the reality is when you increase frequency, you're going to see that dip. You're going to see net. You'll see more opens, you'll see more clicks, but even though the unsubscribe rate goes down, you are seeing more unsubscribes. So you want to be mindful of that when you look at these numbers. So we're in the home stretch here. Last couple minutes, I'm going to leave some time for Q&A at the end here, but I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts on how you use these results. So the first thing is you need to understand that these are what you might call process metrics, meaning they are descriptive of elements of your email program, and they certainly they're indicators of how successful your email program will be or is, but it is really only telling you a story of how well your creative design, so how well your subject line and pre-header text was written, how your content was planned from a click-through perspective, offers and content. If you're really looking at if you have more of a direct response use for the program, you're testing it'll tell you how strongly your offers or your content resonated with your audience. And in terms of deliverability, list hygiene, when you see unsubscribe rates, when you see bounce rates, all these metrics you see in this report are going to tell you bits of the story, but ultimately they're directional and they really ladder up to what you ultimately want to drive in terms of your business goals. So that's one of the email's greatest strengths, is that it really ties very well into business results that matter, which largely means revenue, real dollars that you can measure. But know that I really hope that you are not in a position where you are tying your raise or your promotion to improvements on open and click-through rates, because that's missing the point of all of this. So please take these for what they are. Two, when you look at these numbers, definitely take the time to benchmark against similar industries, right? It doesn't have to be just your own industry. Sometimes it's worth looking at other industries that you aspire to. I've had plenty of conversations with brands where they say, well, I understand our vertical, and we're fine, we're at the top of in our industry, where you might be on the front edge of it. But if it may be worth looking at others and see, well, how do we compare? The next thing I would recommend is, and this ties into, everything we talked about here, but really, benchmark against your top quartiles. What I talked about being aspirational and really thinking about what's possible, right? Really, as you look at the report, aim higher. Now, don't go crazy and give yourself unreasonable goals, but one of the things that I do with clients is try to set goals that are reasonable, but definitely don't just sit back and say, well, it is what it is. When you put pen to paper and you really write down what you're trying to strive for, you start realizing how creative you can get and things that you might try to move the needle on any of these metrics. The fourth thing I would say here is, if you're not already doing this, use these types of benchmarks to get, to really try to advocate for more budget or more resources. If you are like many of the marketers that I've come to know and appreciate, you are probably wearing more than one hat. Maybe you're wearing just the email hat, but you're the lone wolf. You're the only one in the entire organization that does it, or you're responsible for multiple digital channels, and email is just one of them. And so you have you've got to balance your budgets. But when you look at how your email program does, you might be able to leverage these benchmarks to advocate and make the case for more budget or resources. So take that click-through performance and you think about responsive templates and making that move. This is definitely a way to leverage that. And frankly, when you look at, especially when you look at other competitors in other industries, if you find yourself in a position where you're behind, then I would definitely recommend use the storyline of, hey, our competitors are beating us. Do you want to lose or do you want to win? And so, if you have the type of leadership that responds to that, definitely leverage that. But certainly, don't just give these numbers, but try to give some context of why it's important to pay attention to these. The fifth tip I'll leave you with here is, focus efforts on really big issues and opportunities. And this really goes to, you may only have the bandwidth to approach any one or two of these different areas, but really think about what makes the biggest impact for your business. This goes to, a conversation I have quite often, which is, taking your email program and really try to map it to business goals. Sometimes you might be in a position where you are just executing and you're just being asked to check a box and make sure that an email goes out on top of your social post and making sure the website's up to date and making all these other pieces that you're trying to coordinate. But make sure that as you look at these numbers and you try to set goals, don't get lost in the tactics and just make sure that you know what moving the open rate is going to mean, and be prepared to tell the story. So if you're going to look at moving the needle on click-through rates, and take a look at the story you're going to tell. You're going to be telling a story about how many more visits to the website people that came in via email spent than those that came in from other advertising, like paid search or display that you're doing, right? you really want to be able to tell that story and try to make sure that you're connecting it to something that is, a bit of a love language for whoever is your business leadership. They're going to care about certain things, and if time spent on the site, number of visitors that are being driven to the website through email, make sure that you just focus your energy in the right way. And for those of us in this age, it's a fun time to be in this space. The tool sets are vastly more advanced than they used to be, even 3 to 5 years ago. But if you are not already using all the tools at your disposal, then you might be missing out on some opportunities of scale and efficiency. If you're the only person being asked to do everything, definitely seek the extra help if you need it. And really, if you're serious about driving long-term results, really take advantage of what's there, and start planning out ways to leverage the technology at hand. So, after it's all said and done, hopefully you'll be doing something like this. A little bit of Carlton doesn't hurt anybody, but certainly, as you set goals, as you look at these benchmarks, be sure that you set your own benchmarks. Try to drive improvements year over year based on your own data, but leverage these results across all this data from this report in a way that makes sense. Don't bank everything on it, but certainly it provides you great context and gives you maybe a better story to tell. So with that, I want to leave the lines open for questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jay. Just a quick reminder to all the attendees, the full video of the webinar will be sent to you guys tomorrow morning in an email, and that email will also include a link to the slide deck as well as the full report, so you can really dig into these benchmarks and figure out what's most important for you and your organization. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to remind everyone you can throw some questions into the GoToWebinar interface at any time, and we can get to those. We had a couple come in towards the beginning that I think we could get to pretty quickly and easily. And Jay, if we could just get through these a bit quickly to make sure people can get back to whatever they need to do today, that'd be great.
Sure thing.
Awesome. So right off the bat, we had a couple people ask about pre-headers. It seems like it's something people are focusing on more now. They want to avoid those ugly, open this email in a browser or whatever. How many characters? Do you have a best practice of how many characters or words you can play with in that pre-header?
Yeah, so I would say real easy. Look at if you have an iPhone, open it up. Default is 2 lines of text. Just count the number of characters. I think the number is somewhere between, it's actually a pretty healthy number, like 40 to 60 characters, including spaces. So definitely take a look at that. Take advantage of it. It can be a little bit lengthier. It's not going to hurt you. But the reality is that subject lines get truncated faster than the pre-header text does. So that would be the rule of thumb, and that's where I'd point you.
Great. Yeah, here at Digiday, one of our best practices for that is we generally try to keep the most important information of the pre-header towards the front, but then be aware of the fact that could expand for up to 100 characters in some cases in like the iPhone view. So yeah, we try to front load it and then make sure we don't have any of that ugly text creeping in.
Yep.
Great. We had another few questions. This is a big picture one, but what would you say which metric would you say is the most important? The open, the click rate, or the click to open rate?
I think it really depends. Great question. It really is going to depend on what is important to your business, right? So if you are in a publishing arena, for example, you might be really gauged on impressions. So every time an email is opened, and that means images are rendered and the pixel that tracks the open has fired, that might be, you might be looking not really at unique opens, but total opens, right? If you are in e-commerce or retail and, really all of your conversion happens on your website, then you're probably more interested in click to open rate. So I hate to leave you with it depends, but it really does depend on what is, like I said, sort of what is the love language of your leadership and your business? What do they care about the most? And you kind of line that up accordingly.
Got it. Yeah, it's absolutely, like you said, absolutely going to depend. It's really about finding what are those KPIs for you and what you're really trying to accomplish. And I think that's really the key message from the whole webinar today is you need to, if you don't have the bandwidth to do all of these things, there's so much potential, there's so many opportunities and options. It's really about keying in on what those most important things are for you. Okay, great. We had another question about testing subject lines. How often should we be doing it? You talked about maybe not doing it for every single one, but do you have a best practice as far as that goes?
Yeah, I would say that when I talk about a learning agenda, what I mean by that is think about what you want to understand. So if you know that your audience is, let's say you happen to be able to tell who your millennials are, right? And the question you want to ask that drives the testing is really, what are the types of subject lines that my audience, let's say in this case millennials, responds to the most? So then you segment off that group, you send them tests, and maybe you over a course of a year, and depending on if you have seasonality, you factor that in. But basically, run a few tests. And the thing about the irony about subject line testing is that if you do it every single time, you might go to sleep at night, and especially if you do an A/B and then a winner to the subject line that opens the most. It's a kind of a crutch. But it doesn't answer your question, right? The question of what is the type of subject line that resonates the most. So if you're testing things like emoji, do they respond better to that? Do they respond to mystery type of subject lines? Do they respond to long versus short? Those are all tests that help you, that answer the question, what are the types? And once you run tests and they're statistically significant enough, that should be the end of the story. Like, statistically significant has to mean something. And so when you run a test, and you do it intentionally, and you do it with the right methodology in terms of holding the control, having one control and having a test, and make sure that it's statistically significant, then you should be able to draw conclusions that you can apply. Now, it doesn't mean you do it once and then forget about it for the next 5 years, but my concern about A/B testing where you have a champion is that sometimes if you set a test, and most marketers are in a hurry, they say, well, I'm going to take the winning subject line after 1 hour and send the 80% to the rest. You might find that the winning, air quote, winning subject line actually performed worse than the other one, and you sent basically the actual losing subject line to the 80%. So give yourself time if you can, if you're going to do that type of testing. But more importantly, what I would say is be intentional about what you're testing. Think about what you want to learn and apply, and then see if you can, line that up the right way.
Great, thanks, Jay. We had a question about active and inactive segmentation to improve open rates. How would they go about doing that? How do you get started with building out those segments and then improving those open rates by making good use of them?
Yeah. So one of the things that depending on the platform, I know for the Marketing Cloud at IBM, we have a piece of data that tells us the last time someone opened or clicked. You can look, most ESPs allow you to, pull out everybody that's opened or everybody that's clicked. When you do the data gymnastics and you split that out, and you see how they perform. The approach that I've taken with clients where it really made sense to them was you take your actives and you continue to market to them as usual. But with your inactives, it means that you're going to do different things, meaning you might do a subject line that's a little bit different, and really what you're trying to do is move those inactive people. So, you're going to set a definition of inactive, and that's going to be different for everybody. But let's say you use someone that has not opened or clicked an email in 6 months. You take that group and you're going to have to figure out, how do I get them back into the game? How do I get them back into the other side of the fence, which is they've opened or clicked recently? So that means you're going to do things that might be a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more creative on the subject line or pre-header text, right, to get that open. And so, the story you want to tell is over time, let's say, bad news, you do your database analysis and you see that half of your database is active and half is very inactive. The story you want to tell is, hey, guess what? Because I did these intentional things for inactive, we now have 55% that are active and only 45% that are inactive. So that's how you want to start moving the needle, and that's gonna be meaningful, right? That's gonna be meaningful to someone who doesn't have the time to think beyond, like, what's the size of our database, right? There's so many different metrics that we're trying to keep track of, but that's an easy thing for someone to wrap their head around.
Great. moving on to another question we had here. This is something more practical, especially about, we touched a little bit on the importance of being visual in your emails, especially if right off the bat at the top.
Yep.
Something that you may see, you still may be seeing from e-commerce and e-retailers is some sort of like navigation at the top, maybe links to click here for menswear and women's wear and kids or home or whatever it may be. Do you recommend leaving those in or taking them out and just really just hitting them with the CTA above and beyond everything else?
You know, it's a great question, and I'd say that if you're honest and if you really believe in analytics and you want to let that tell the story, what you want to do is if you're tracking the number of clicks that come into, so let's say you have one of those website navigation links in your email, and let's say you've got it tagged the right way, where you can see that the click came from email, but it also came from a specific link, which was, let's say in the retail story, let's say I clicked on men's in the navigation in an email. I would want to look and see how many clicks did I actually get over the course of time to do that, to get people there. And so the argument for it is like, well, it's a utility thing, and the funny thing is that, hey, this email looks a lot like my website. If you do not see those numbers proving the case, then I would argue that less is more. Kind of to that point, keep it simple. You've got 2 seconds, 4 seconds. If you're lucky, get to the point. And this is one of those things where when I really talk a lot lately about breaking up a newsletter. Like, if you curate all this content, don't have like your favorite kid and then your least favorite kid. I mean, basically what happens with email newsletters is like top to bottom, top story always gets more clicks every single time. No matter what, right? And so giving each story, if you are in sort of a newsletter kind of a scenario, give each story a subject line of its own and pre-header, because there's probably, someone took the time to curate that. And as long as you deliver that content to a relevant audience, then they're not going to penalize you for sending more often. So definitely, I think, the long story short, going back to the navigation, look at your data, see if people are actually clicking through it. If they're not, take it out and see what happens, because you might find that there was no loss, and it's certainly less distracting for the reader.
All right, great. Thank you for all of your great insights, Jay. I think that's just about all the time we have for today. And of course, thank you to our partner, IBM Marketing Cloud, for presenting this with us today and bringing it to all of you. And thank all of you for attending our webinar. As a reminder, keep an eye on your inboxes tomorrow for that link to the recording, as well as a link to the full report, so you can really dive deep into the nitty-gritty of what is most important to you in your organization. And that's about all we have for you today. So thanks again, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
Take it easy.